All right, we are here at the Ford Center in Frisco, Texas. It's the Big 12's Media Day. Matt Campbell spoke to us at length this morning about this year's coming team, an early trip to Ireland to kick off the season. It was really good stuff. This is when you get Campbell at his best. It's not in season. He's super forthright about the team. You can check out the entire video on our YouTube page. Subscribe to our podcast feeds as well. We're presented, as always, by Fareway Meat Grocery down here at the Big 12's Media Day. Here's our conversation from earlier today with Matt Campbell.
I think that obviously it's a constant work in progress. I think I respect that, Jamie's got a really tough job to do, and he's trying to do everything in his power for the best interest of our athletic department. So, again, that's where you hope relationship and trust over the years can work hard to get, obviously, everybody where they need to get to.
We're going to give something to everybody. Is that something that you see fits along with the Iowa State culture? How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I think absolutely. I think everybody's trying to figure out how do you do this the best way. I think obviously from Jamie's standpoint, that is, an opportunity to make an impact across the board. So I think, from our standpoint at Iowa State, it has been bigger than just one team or one situation. It's been about everybody. So, again, you put the time and effort to trust the decisions he makes and then do everything we can with the resources we have in our own football program to do the best we can within our own program as well.
I know it's still crazy and nobody really knows what day-to-day brings, but do you think we're heading in the right direction just as an industry?
Yeah, I think it's too early to tell. I think until you figure out, is this really the number? Are there ways around the number? There will be. What are those? Is it limit, the probably disparity that we have right now. I think we live in a world in college football that looks like Major League Baseball, in a lot of ways. And so, it's really too early to tell, I think, Chris, on that. I hope that we're there, but I think, again, you're hoping because I don't think you have any clarity if this is really what's going on. I think the positive when I look at our own team is, we were able to retain our football team. I think it says a lot about Iowa State football. I think if you looked at the top 20 guys in our program, probably could have made a heck of a lot more money at a lot of other places, and we were able to keep our kids home, and I think that was huge. And my hope is that we continue to build forward from an administration standpoint, from a university standpoint, that we continue to have the resources to be able to compete at a really high level, because player acquisition is going to be critical for any team to be successful.
Internally, how have you done that? Because it can't be all about money to keep these guys, right? How have you kept them, and do you think that? How do you keep that going forward when money's now not underneath and everybody's doing it from the university standpoint?
I think the biggest thing for us is, number one, figuring out collectively as an administration and as a university, are we going to compete financially, at the level it takes to be competitive, whatever that number looks like and is. Because you're right, it is not under the table anymore. It's black and white. And, but I also think the development of our football program, who we've been the last 10 years, certainly is a huge advantage for Iowa State football right now, and it's been a huge advantage to keep our football team. So, we're really grateful for that, and we're not going to shy away from that. And, again, that's a tribute to, Jamie and the resources he's put into retention of our student athletes and nutrition and, strength and conditioning and certainly athletic training, all those areas that are really critical for our success. And now just continuing to work through it as a university, as a school, to put ourselves in the best position to continue to grow ourselves forward with this new era that's coming our way.
Does the success you guys have had putting guys in the NFL help too?
Boy, I would certainly hope so. I think when you look in the National Football League right now, and our guys haven't just gone to the National Football League. I mean, our guys are playing elite football. You would say in some positions we have some of the best players in the National Football League that have come through our program. And so you're certainly really proud of that. You're mostly proud of the individuals that have done that. But I think it certainly has given us credibility in terms of us as a development program that, if a young man can come here and have a chance to become one of the best at their position groups and help our team collectively become its best. And we're really appreciative of the young men that have come and done that. And honestly, there's a lot of guys in our program that we feel have that kind of ability right now that are going to continue that tradition moving forward. So we're really appreciative of those guys as well.
You mentioned bringing back those guys that could have left. To be back in this spot where you finished the regular season last year in Dallas, what's the motivation to get back here, and is that the goal?
Well, I think you'd be foolish if it's not the goal, right? I mean, if you step into this city and don't feel a kick in the gut, then I think you're a fool. And, so I think there's one thing that I loved about this team is everybody sprinted back to the facility in January. Nobody moseyed back. And from a coaching staff, from a player standpoint, I think everybody came back with purpose. And, I don't think anybody was satisfied about what was accomplished a year ago. I think everybody was very proud of some of the milestones that were hit, and I think we learned a lot about ourselves last year. I think the amount of adversity that we had to go through last football season was the most adversity I've ever had to deal with in a football team, in a program, and the ability to weather that storm and grow through it was awesome. But there was also some moments where we needed to be better, and we have to get better. And so I think that's what I've always loved about coaching is the curiosity of how do you grow forward? How do we grow greatness forward? And I think that's been the mantra. It's been the mission since we've touched back in January, and it's not just from me, but it's been our coaches, it's been our players, and it's been really a joy to be a part of that with this group. And I've really appreciated the tenacity and approach that this group's really come back and what they've done over the last 6 to 7 months, and a lot of work to do, obviously, and it's all coming really fast for this football team, and obviously the challenge upon it is going to be extremely challenging with the schedule and everything else that comes at it. But I think this group's at least has the lessons learned to be able to handle the challenges in front of us.
Have you, in the offseason, sat back and thought about all the injuries and just, kind of miraculous you guys were in this building last year with everything you went through?
Yeah, I don't know if I thought about it because we lived it, and it was probably as challenging, as gut-wrenching at times as anything we've dealt with, just because, man, you felt for some of the really talented players that you lost. You felt for the team that you felt at times maybe you weren't at full strength when you wanted to be your best. But I also think there was this overwhelming pride of how guys stepped up. And, it is football, and you're going to have setbacks and you're going to have injuries. And I've always said I think one of our greatest gifts at Iowa State has been our ability to respond to adversity. And, I thought last year was a great tribute to that, to the leadership group, the seniors, to the coaching staff, the ability to persevere through that. So, again, I think it gave us some great lessons learned for even this year's team of, hey, like, adversity's coming, it's going to hit, and how do we work through that, whether it's in the game or whether it's through a 1-game losing streak or 2-game losing streak like we were on last year, and how do you snap back through it?
There's also a point like the linebacker specifically. You went so deep. You were like, 12 guys deep at that position. Does that help you this year?
Well, I think you've already seen it. You've seen that room be as talented and as competitive as a room probably has been since I've been here, and obviously it was tough to go through that, but when you see a guy like Bo Goodwin now that's 240 pounds instead of 212 and just got done playing, like I said, just got done playing 8-man football a year before, and you're like, whoa, look at what this guy, gained from playing in those games last year. And, you look at Will McLaughlin, who had a full off season, and didn't have surgery in July, and was rehabbing all the way up until we put him in a football game, and probably, could have questioned should that have been even in the game, and that kid played his tail off for us to be able to, do what we did, and to get Bake back, to get Carson Willich back, and to have Kel Brzezina finally healthy, like those are all huge wins for us. And, Cooper Ebel finally healthy, that kid was like the warrior last year. Everybody assumed he was healthy, and that kid separated his shoulder at West Virginia and could hardly lift his arm the whole season, but that kid, he stayed in for the betterment of the team. And so, I think what's been created with that, you lost Zach Lovett for the first 6 weeks of the season, and how that kid played in the bowl game was incredible, and so I just think you got a lot of guys that ended up stepping up in some different ways at some different times and really give this group great competition. And we've said this, Chris, this as much. When you have real competition, like, you got to come to practice to earn the right to get on the field. That's when you're at your best. And I think we've got that in a lot of spots because of some of the injuries that occurred last year, safety that happened a little bit last year with what happened in that group. You got it going on right now at linebacker. And I think that those things are really big for us in a positive way.
I remember watching. Sorry, Eugene. I remember watching in that Kansas game some of the safeties almost pushing the linebackers into position. When you do have that competition and health in the linebacker room, how much does it help the rest of the defense?
Well, you got to remember, Jay, I think that group, right, the linebackers, they are the communicators to the defense, right? They're the guys that have to set because they're communicating to the front, and they've also, sometimes you say, well, the safety can do it. Well, the safety, you got to go all the way over to the other side of the field. Like, those linebackers got to be the foundation of communication on your team to be successful. And so that probably at times hurt us as much as anything last year, is maybe not so much the play, but just the communication on defense. And, there were moments that we probably weren't what we've been defensively throughout the season last year, and some of that was communication driven. So now you've got guys that made mistakes, had the ability to dissect those mistakes and can come back ready to go, and got that experience of confidence of like, I know I can do it too when we're right. I think those are big things for us, and I think it'll help our defense. We're always going to be best on defense when all 11 guys know where their help is, they understand what's going on, and have the ability to be in the right place for the betterment of the defense. So we've been our best when it's looked like that, and I think it'll help us immensely with this linebacker group.
How's the team's health this summer, and guys that were maybe nicked up coming out of the spring? How's that look?
Yeah, I think we feel really good about that group. We had a new hire in our athletic training room. Joe Resendez came in. I think it was a huge win for us. Joe's got a professional background. Was the head athletic trainer with the Sacramento Kings. Came from the XFL. Where we had a couple guys that had him in the San Antonio Brahmers. I think he's really brought maturity and probably some professionalism, and I think it's really helped our group out immensely. So, yeah, we're excited about where that, the health of our team is going to start. It's going to be a really physical fall camp, so who knows where it's going to be by the time we start the season. But the reality of it is, I think the depth of this team is ready to handle any challenges that come our way.
How much has the sports science of health evolved since you've been at Iowa State?
Yeah, I think it's evolved immensely. I think from nutrition and the value that has brought into the development of the football program to, how do you keep these guys on the field? How do you create a practice plan? How do you create especially if you want to be your best in November and you want to be playing in these championship games and these championship moments, how do you be able to put your team in the best situation? I think all those things, having a group and a team that is able to sit down and have conversation like that every week, I think it's really important. And so, and I think as our world continues to grow more in the professional ranks, boy, you better have an elite athletic training room that has the ability to diagnose, understand, and then help your football team be its best in some of its most critical moments. So, yeah, we're really fortunate. I thought it was a huge hire for us this offseason and felt like it was a huge step in the right direction for us.
Who are some guys on this year's team that nobody's talking about right now that you think are going to be breakout candidates?
Gosh, I think we played so many guys last year that I think you guys have such a good beat on what our football team looks like. I think the kid that probably flashed the most offensively, at times for a young guy, this River Peppers, really came in and had a dynamic spring for us. I think he's a guy that is probably got difference maker ability on the offensive side of the football. I'm excited to see what his fall camp kind of looks like for this team. I think Marcus Neal continues to be, a pretty special football player. I think if you just watch the second half of the Miami game, and you watch how that guy tackled, I don't know if I've seen anything like that, to be honest with you, since I've been here. So, I think he's got a chance to be really special. And, there's that safety room's got some guys that I think have got a chance to really kind of showcase maybe just how deep that safety room can be. So we're excited about where we're at, but those would be the two guys I'd probably highlight right now. Just I thought had really, really special springs. Another guy that probably doesn't get talked enough about that we lost last year was Drew Surges. We didn't have him the entire season. Obviously if you followed us in 23, Drew was a key piece of this football team weathering the storm. And, to have him back, I thought he had a really great spring as well. So I think he'll be a huge asset to have our football team and have Drew back on the roster for us too, ready to play.
In your earlier years, how did you
You stay authentic and confident in your vision for this program, and what are your thoughts on the way that it has built up over the last 10 years?
Yeah, staying confident in this sport, in this profession, is not always easy. I think that I've always given credit that we've had great people internally. And, from our coaching staff to our players, they've given me the confidence to say what we're trying to do and what we're trying to build is right. And, and right for Iowa State, and I think those were the things that I've always appreciated. I don't think we'd be here today or had the ability to build the program we have today without the players that came through here, their leadership, their faith in myself and our staff. And then I think so much of loyalty and faithfulness that we've gotten from so much of our coaching staff, and that's off the field and on the field. I mean, some of those guys have been with us, so many of those guys have been with us from day one, and, they've been absolute, key components to why I think there's just been faith of like what we're trying to do and how we're trying to do it's the right way for us to be successful. So I'm really grateful for that. We wouldn't be here without great people.
How are you approaching D-line with camp? You got these transfers coming in, returning guys. What's the game plan there?
Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting, honestly, Chris. I think that's a room that I'm probably most interested to see their development through fall camp. Obviously, it's huge to have Dom back. I think if you really study the videotape from last year, Ike probably deserved to play a lot more than he did. I think he was really productive on a group that wasn't as productive as they needed to be. And I think he probably should have played a lot more than maybe he was playing. But I think for Ike, he's had a great offseason and understanding why maybe he wasn't on the field as much as he needed to be. And so I think you got two great pieces to build around that I think are high-end talents. And then, what's the development of the rest of this group? I'm excited. Zamir Hawk has had flashes of brilliance and excellence. Has shown that he's got the ability to be a really talented football player for us. I'm really excited about Trey Verdone. I think he's a guy that's come in and had flash wow moments in spring ball. I thought did a really great job. And then we're going to see these transfers. We're going to see, what those guys can bring to the table. Tama's been super impressive early on. We haven't played. He hasn't even wore a helmet here. So, to get all excited about that is hard. But what you do have is videotape evidence from him, leading, the Ivy League in tackles for a loss and, being up there in sacks, and you see get off and you see twitch. And I'm just excited. I think there's a lot of depth. Elijah Nakonsa, Jace Gilbert. Man, these are young, talented guys. I think the talent in that room is as talented as we've been. Man, are we mature enough to be ready to go and play the level we're going to take to play great football? And obviously that's good. Get tested. Not like you got, 4 weeks to figure it out. You better be ready to rock and roll.
What about Bacon? I remember at this time last year there was a little talk of putting his hand on the ground some like he did in 23. I mean, his role changed at all after the injury? What do we expect there?
Yeah, I think the first thing is absolute health, and his confidence. I think he gained that this spring. I think he really did. But I think Caleb and Zach Lovett are guys that give you position flexibility, right? They are so critical. You saw it in the bowl game. Zach had a sack and a half, and I think he had like three tackles for a loss. I mean, not having that guy last year was critically, debilitating at times. And when both of those guys kind of play the same position and give you the same thing, when you lost those two guys, it was like, man, that was tough sledding, So to get both those guys back and both those guys at full strength, I think it'll be huge for us. And you've heard me say it forever. The more multiple we can be defensively, the more we can, change the look pre-snap, post-snap, the better we're going to be. And those guys are key pieces of the puzzle for that to happen. So, yes, I think both those guys have the ability to get you to a 4 down, get you to, a 3-4, get you to a 3-3 stack. Like, man, those guys are key pieces of that puzzle. Having them healthy is most key, because no matter what they are, they're really talented football players. They've proven to make huge plays for us no matter what defense we're playing. They've been difference makers. So just getting those guys back will be huge.
Outside of Jontez and Jeremiah, how's the rest of the secondary shaping up in your eyes?
Yeah, I'm really excited about that group. I really am. I feel like that group's there. When you look at Jamison Patton's played a ton of football for us. I mean, he's kind of, nobody talks a lot about J-Mo, but man, that guy's played a lot of really good football for us. Kaijon Cummings-Coleman was a redshirt. He redshirted a year ago. You would have said maybe through the last 4 to 5 weeks of the fall last year, there might not have been a better player on the field defensively than Kaijon. You know, Tayshaun James, like, yeah, didn't look great maybe in the first half of Kansas game. It looked pretty good after that. And how that guy played at Cincinnati and how that guy played down the stretch was really huge. And so I think you look at that safety room, and like I said, you get Drew Surges back, who, man, started games for us in 23, played critical reps for us in 23, and a guy that's healthy again and confident. It's huge to have that group back. And then, you know, this corner room, we're probably cautiously optimistic. You know, I mean, I think when you just talk about talent, sheer talent, boy, you're as talented. You know what Benny Nagoya looks like. I think that was probably. I put my GM hat on right there before the start of you know, the bowl prep, and I'm glad I did. You know, because I think, you know, one of my favorite things was Benny had a huge pick in the last scrimmage before we left to go to the bowl game, and you know, I think that guy's got a chance to be really special. And you know, Trey Bell was a huge addition. You know, what he's about, what he brings to the table in that defensive backfield is huge. And then another guy that nobody talks about, redshirted last year, is Quentin Taylor. I mean, man, Quentin Taylor, literally a spring a year ago, was the hot name. He was the hot freshman coming out. Had shoulder surgery right after spring ball, and then came back, and then, man, had a lower leg injury, and so we really didn't have Quentin until the end of the season either. So, man, you're talking about a lot of competition with big, long, athletic corners that we feel really confident in. And, you know, to have Tez and Coop, guys that have played a lot of good football, that's huge to have for us. But those are that I think that defensive backfield is going to be really exciting, great competition.
And in the spring, you noted that Chase was banged up a little bit throughout spring football. How is he looking now, and how would you evaluate the connection he's developing with Rocco?
Well, like I said, how he's looking is he looks great. I think Chase, man, he's got great hands. He's big, he's long, he can really run. So I think those things are uberly positive. Doing it under the lights, doing it with this team, doing it against some of those defensive backs in fall camp, man, that's another story. And so I think, you know, this will be a really huge fall camp for him. I think Rocco's done a great job bringing, man, that receiver room together, and, you know, continues to foster, I think, a really great relationship with the tight ends, the receivers, and the tailbacks. But, man, I think we're all, you know, at least very proud of what Chase has come in from a work ethic standpoint so far, and how he's went to work and how he's gone about his business. Him and Xavier have been really special and brought great maturity early on to that wide receiver room.